Hello. The Simone Biles incident at the Olympics reminded me of a story called The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, which was written by an English writer called Alan Sillitoe in 1959. Now, I am not talking about Simone Biles because I can't be in her mind the same way as the writer was in the mind of the protagonist of this story. But I saw some parallels which may or may not be valid. So I'm just going to tell you about the story, but first I'm going to explain to you the social situation in England in 1959. Now, at that time, there weren't that many ethnic minorities in Britain. There weren't even that many black people. There were Jamaicans starting to come in, but they hadn't really made an impact on society in 1959. They weren't really noticeable in that way. So, but it turns out that any society at all has its own stratification. And it might choose colour, it might choose religion, or in this case, according to Sillitoe, it's choosing social class. Now, Sillitoe was part of a group of writers who were of the opinion that Britain was a class-ridden society where the poor were oppressed and the rich or the toffs were the oppressors. I think you might notice some similarity to certain people's attitudes in America now when they're talking about intersectionality. It's not a new idea, it's just got different, more technical sounding names. And Alan Sillitoe was part of this post-Second World War generation when Britain was rocking on its heels. It was almost bankrupt. The empire was crumbling and nobody really knew. I mean, it's not like everyone was walking around in a state of confusion. No, most people just got on with their lives. They didn't notice what was going on. They just got on with things. Alan Sillitoe was wrong. If you look back at it, you'll see, because there were many working class people who made their way up the social ladder in Britain at that time. For my parents, for instance, my mother came from a very poor working class background, but when she died, she was a very comfortable middle class lady. And of course, I went to university, and so did, well, I'm not going to talk too much about my family. So the the possibility was there. It wasn't as stratified as Sillitoe likes to think or liked to think. And but there was a fashion, there was a thing at that time, and again, very similar to what's going on in America right now. In America, it's just bigger. But there was a thing, like everybody, a certain group is stuck in this certain position and they will never get out of it because there's another group that is constantly keeping them down. In the British universe of Alan Sillitoe in the 1950s, this was the rich landowners, the intellectuals, the university establishment. Yeah, at that time that was considered an establishment. And the BBC, all those things that we think of now as, well, so-called, fool you, I'm a progressive type. But at that time, they were considered the reactionaries, the oppressors, and the working class. The white working class were the people who were never going to be allowed to shine, to get out, to go forward. And as I said, that's really nonsense. There were many who did, and many who became very wealthy off the post, the 1960s, really, when it all started to boom again. But this is Sillitoe's vision rather, of Britain in the 1950s. And the hero, if you like to call him that, is a 17-year-old lad called Smith. And I don't think it's entirely a coincidence that he's chosen the second name Smith. Smith is something of an everyman name in Britain in the 50s. And of course, Winston Smith was the hero of 1984, which had been published just a few years before Silito's story about this long distance runner. Well, who is the long distance runner? What it is, there was a system of school they were called approved schools or borstals. If there was a child offender, then the idea was as follows: they haven't had a proper structure in their lives. They haven't had a proper education. They have to learn self-discipline and good citizenship. And the way you do that is, instead of putting them in prison, you take them and you put them in an approved school or a borstal. I'm actually not too sure now why it got called a borstal. Maybe the first one was called that. But it was run along the lines of an English public school of the time. That was the idea. Of course, the regime would be very strict, but then in public schools at the time, the regimes were also strict. And as it so happens, there's some sort of interchange between the boys of this approved school and a public school. They're having a race against each other, and it's made more or less apparent that, as privileged as those toffs were, they had about as much freedom as the boys in the borstal, and were often treated not that much better. So this story was written from the point of view of this 17-year-old kid who was in a borstal. He had a talent for running, and the principal of the school thought that this was a great way for this kid to get out of the petty criminal environment that he'd been in before he was sentenced to this term in the approved school. And he talked about the pride of running for your country, running for your friends, running, winning for the people who are rooting for you. He makes a lot out of that. And so for that reason, Smith is allowed to go out of the school every morning and do practice runs. They know he's not going to run away because he'd only get caught again anyway. At least that's what he says. And the culmination of the story is when they have this final race against the public school, the posh school. And Smith has been planning this the whole time. He's going to throw the race. And he does it, he plans exactly where he's going to stop so that the whole school could see that he had actually stopped, that he hadn't fallen over or collapsed or anything, that he just stopped. And he did that. So it was there in his heart right from the beginning. And he trained really well to win. But he also trained with so much hate in his heart for the system, for the educated people who were running the school, and the bullies, for sure. And the regime of the British system as he saw it at the time, and the society, and the fact that he would never be allowed to get any better. They were all going to see that he was going to stop right there, and the school would not have the kudos of a really good runner. Showing that this working class lad could beat a public school lad just by being better. Now, he rationalizes it that way. You sit there and you read the story and you think, he could have got out of his situation if he'd have made the win. He could have become a celebrated athlete that the whole country admired. He could have stepped up. And he does talk towards the end of the story, right at the end of the story. He talks about going back to prison, that he'll end up back in prison probably. So he's destroying himself, but he doesn't care. This is something from the novel. The pot-bellied, pop-eyed bastard gets pleased at this. He says how he's practicing. Good show. I know you'll get us that cup, he says. And I swear under my breath, like buggery, I will. No, I won't get them that cup, even though the stupid, twitching bastard has all his hopes in me. Because what does his balmy hope mean, I ask myself? It doesn't mean a bloody thing to me, only to him. And it means as much to him as it would mean to me if I picked up the racing paper and put my bet on a horse I didn't know, had never seen, and didn't care a sod if I ever did see. That's what it means to him. And I'll lose that race because I'm not a racehorse at all. And I'll let him know it when I'm about to get out. If I don't sling my hook even before the race, by Christ I will. I'm a human being and I've got thoughts and secrets and bloody life inside me that he doesn't know is there. And he'll never know what's there because he's stupid. And you read that story and you might think, well, I wonder who is stupid here. You say he's stupid because he can't see inside your head. But you are the one who's going to lose. And that's what he does. The story is interesting from the point of view of the narrative, because he's having these thoughts while he's running. So he gets to go out, which is really quite a privilege, from the Borstal. He goes out every morning, even though it's cold. And, once he gets going, he sees nature. He sees rabbits and birds, and he enjoys the run. And he could enjoy it more, except that his heart is so full of I was going to say of bile. I've got that word in my mind now. His heart is so full of vituperation that he can't allow himself to feel the beauty of the world around him, even though he knows it's beautiful, and to enjoy the idea that he might come out top somewhere. He's going to make himself fail because he hates the society in which he is operating so much that he doesn't see any point in a victory there. And even his friends, the last bit of the story is this. I mean, Silito cheats rather a lot because this is a 17-year-old semi-literate, and the writing is beautiful. The expression is beautiful. He uses long words. So Silito has given this kid far more expressive sophistication than he could ever have had in real life. You can analyze that. The sort of cheating narrative of the 1950s socialist. But here it says, I'm going to give this story to a pal of mine and tell him that if I do get captured again by the coppers, that is, he's got an idea for a job. When he gets out, he's going to pull another theft. And the previous theft was just an opportunistic break-in to a bakery. But this time he's planned something, okay? And so he says, I'm going to give this story to a pal of mine. If I do get captured again by the coppers, he can try and get it put into a book or something. Because I'd like to see the governor's face when he reads it, if he does, which I don't suppose he will, even if he did read it, though I don't think he'd know what it was all about. And if I don't get caught, the bloke I give the story to will never give me away. He's lived in our terrace for as long as I can remember, and he's my pal. That I do know. Now, look at the end of that story. So we're reading the story, so the story came out. How did it come out? It came out either because he did get thrown into jail, so the story was given to somebody to be put in a book or something, or that so-called pal of his handed the story over against his wishes because he wasn't such a great pal after all. Either way, that kid has been shafted by the system that he hated so much, and the problem here is that he was the one who did it to himself. Anyway, I thought you might be interested in this story. You can find it anywhere online, and it's part of a series of depressing working class narratives written by Alan Sillitoe during the 1950s. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.